He had lived alone for 12 long years, speaking only to his horses and the wind that clawed through the rocks of the Sangre de Cristo Mountains. Folks in Socorro County called him a ghost in boots, Ethan Callahan, a man carved from dust and silence, tending his land at the edge of what the locals feared. The Silence Valley, where even coyotes had learned to whisper. But everything changed that one blistering afternoon, under a sky so cruelly blue it seemed to mock the earth below, when 12 Apache warrior women appeared at his gate hungry, bleeding, and bone-weary. Their feet were cracked and blistered from days of fleeing through thorny mesquite and dry riverbeds. Their eyes, sunburnt and hollow, held no fear-only grit, and with them came a sound Ethan hadn't heard in a dozen years. Hope, knocking. If you're drawn to stories where love rises from dust and blood, smash that Heather Day and drop a big one in the comments. Let's show Wild West love is alive and ridin' hard. The wind that day had teeth. It came up from the south, scraping across the land like a bone saw, lifting fine red dirt into the air until the whole world shimmered like the inside of a fever dream. Ethan was by the water trough, tightening a saddle girth, shirtless, skin sun-hardened and scarred like a canyon wall. His back bore the tale of a knife fight he never spoke of, and his left hand trembled slightly, a gift from the war he no longer believed in. Then came the sound, not a horse's whinny, not the distant bark of prairie dogs, but the sharp shaking knock of a human hand 3 times against old wood. He froze. No one knocked here. Not in 12 years. Not since the night he buried his wife and daughter in the back pasture under a cottonwood tree. Not since he quit being a bounty hunter and started pretending that peace was enough to fill the hole in his chest. The knock came again, then a second, louder, urgent. He moved, slow and silent, across the yard. Dust curled around his boots. The old shotgun over the fireplace whispered to him like an old friend with bad advice. And then he heard Ita's voice, muffled through wood, but unmistakable. Apache. His stomach turned to stone. That language had once meant family. It had once been whispered to him in the dark by a woman with eyes like obsidian and lips that tasted of wild honey. But the last time he'd heard it, it had meant betrayal. Screams, gunfire, ashes in his hands where love used to be. Please, a voice rose in halting English, cracked and rasped like sandpaper over gravel. We need shelter, just for the night. He pressed his calloused palm against the wood, felt the tremble on the other side. His gut twisted. The instincts of a man who had outlived ambushes told him this could be a trap. But something in that voice, not a beggar's plea, but a soldier's restraint, something made him hesitate. And then, as if the sky itself was listening, the wind shifted. And through the crack between plank and hinge, he caught a whiff. Blood, sweat, old smokened, something softer, cornmeal, hunger. 12 women, young, too young to carry so much war in their eyes, dressed in torn deerskin, belts looped with knives, beads tangled with dried blood. One girl, maybe 17, had collapsed against the fence post, lips cracked open like dry earth. Another clutched a canteen empty and sucked it like prayer. But it was the one at the front who pulled Ethan's breath straight from his lungs. She stood tall, her body trembling just enough to betray the weight she carried on her shoulders. In her silence, her hair, braided down the center, was caked with dust and dried sweat. A thin cut ran along her temple, still seeping, but her gaze, unshaken, unapologetic, unafraid. My name is Lyra, she said, words thick with accent and exhaustion. These are my sisters. We've been walking for 4 days. The men who chase us, they don't stop. Not for sun, not for sleep. Ethan didn't move. His fingers hovered over the latch. You come armed, he said flatly. Lyra gave a slow, bitter smile. We come alive, that's all. Silence stretched like a noose between them. He should have said no. He should have shut the door and let the desert swallow them whole. But then he looked again, really looked. One girl was shaking from cold despite the sun. Another's fingers were wrapped tight in the hair of the one beside her, like she'd fall apart if she let go. Their skin shimmered with salt, lips blistered, legs scratched raw. Not bandits, not seductresses, warriors, survivors, daughters of a tribe that refused to vanish. Ethan stepped aside. There's water in the barrel. Food's scarce, but you can have what's left of the beans. Lyra blinked once. That was all. No thank you. No bow. Just a sharp note, and then she turned, motioned with 2 fingers. The women moved like wolves, wounded but organized. One helped the youngest. Another scanned the ridge, always watching. As they passed him, the air changed. For 12 years, Ethan had lived in silence. Now it was broken by the sounds of breathing, of boots on floorboards, of a low voice, humming something that sounded like mourning. And then Lyra paused. She looked back at him, no longer asking, no longer explaining. If we stay, they'll come here. Then let them, he said. Her brows lifted. You're not afraid of them? I'm not afraid of much anymore, he muttered, then added, except dying without ever doing one good thing again. That night, while 12 warrior women took turns tending wounds and standing watch, Ethan sat in the dark with a rifle across his lap. Not because he feared them, but because something had already changed inside him, and that terrified him more than any gun. The heat softened as dusk fell, trading the sun's blistering glare for a moody orange hue that painted the valley in firelight and ash. The wind, which had earlier torn through the valley like an angry preacher, quieted into a low whisper, brushing over the brittle grass and shaking the tin roof with a rhythm that sounded almost like breathing. Inside the cabin, the air was dense enough, with smoke or dust, but with presence. Ethan hadn't shared his home with anyone in over a decade, and now 12 bodies moved through the space like they'd been born from the earth and wind outside, too wild to belong under a roof. They didn't speak much. They didn't need to. Even silence has a voice when it's shared. Ethan stood near the hearth, hand resting absently on the mantel, watching Lyra as she knelt by the fire, stirring the pot of beans he'd offered hours ago. The smell of cumin and scorched corn filled the room, unfamiliar and earthy. She moved with a slowness that wasn't weakness, but control, like a mountain deciding when to move. Her fingers, long and slender, bore dirt beneath the nails and small cuts along the knuckles. Hands that had healed, fought, and buried, all without asking permission. The sleeve of her deerskin tunic had slipped down one shoulder, revealing a bruise that bloomed like a purple sunflower across her collarbone. Ethan looked away, not out of shame but out of the quiet reverence men reserve for things they know they don't deserve. You built this place yourself? Lyra asked, not looking up. Her voice was dry but steady, like a stream that had run underground for too long. Ethan nodded, then realized she couldn't see him from where she crouched. Yeah, he said, rubbing the back of his neck. Took about 2 years. First winter damn near froze me to death. Second one I started to like it. Like dying? Like not being around to feel much of anything. Lo. She didn't respond, just gave the pot one last stir, then ladled the beans into an old tin bowl and passed it to the girl nearest the wall, barely 17, her ribs sharp enough to press through the skin. The girl took it with a quiet thank you in Apache, then returned to rocking the smallest among them, a baby swaddled in someone's torn skirt. Ethan's eyes drifted to the back window. The sun was bleeding behind the ridgeline, and the sky had taken on that purple blue that always felt lonelier than black. He didn't realize he'd drifted until Lyra's voice pulled him back. You still sleep with that rifle next to your bed? He turned slowly. She was looking at him now, bowl in hand, steam curling between them like smoke between strangers. Old habits, he replied. Old wounds, she corrected gently. Habits are what we form. Wounds are what form us. That struck deeper than he let on. Is that how you see yourself? He asked, walking over to the table, where the other women now sat in a half-circle of fatigue and hunger. Wounds wearing skin? She didn't answer, but her gaze never left his. And that silence, that damn silence, felt heavier than any answer ever could. Later, after the girls had eaten and laid down wherever space allowed, curled beside each other like animals huddling for warmth, Ethan stepped outside. The night was full of stars, spread wide and sharp above the valley, so bright it almost felt wrong to look up. The land around him was still, except for the creak of cicadas and the distant yip of coyotes. Morning or matink, could never tell. He lit a cigarette with a match struck off the porch post. The sulfur curled into his sinuses. He hadn't smoked in weeks, maybe months. The ritual calmed him, even if the smoke never did. You still run from the war? Her voice again, soft behind him. He didn't turn. Ain't running, I just stopped participating. Looks a lot like hiding. He laughed bitterly. Maybe, but I never raised another gun after what happened. That counts for something. She stepped onto the porch, boots creaking under her weight. He heard her sit on the step beside him, their knees almost touching. Almost. Tell me. What? About the woman. The one whose ghost still sits in your kitchen. Ethan took a long drag. The smoke curled from his nose, pale against the dark. Her name was June, he said eventually. She was Apache like you, except sweeter, softer. The kind that made bread from mesquite flour and carved little animals out of river rock. I met her chasing a bounty up through Sandia. She stole my horse to get her sister away from a bad man. I never got the horse back, but I married her. Lyra stayed quiet. She didn't move, didn't press. She died in fire, Ethan continued, voice rougher now. A sheriff's posse came through, looking for a bandit. Didn't care much that we were clean. Didn't care that she was pregnant. Said Apache blood meant potential threat. They tied me to a mesquite post and made me watch. He crushed the cigarette out beneath his boot. That was the last time I talked to a human being for 8 years. Lyra was silent. Then, my mother died the same year, chained to a tree, because they thought she was hiding my brother. She wasn't. He'd already died of fever. They sat together, two silhouettes cut from pain and smoke, saying nothing, because there was nothing left to say. When he rose to go back inside, Lyra placed a hand on his wrist. Her fingers were cool and strong, and they stopped him like a river cuts through rock, not sudden, but unrelenting. I don't trust men who pity me, she said, but I notice you never looked at me like I was weak. He met her eyes in the dark. Because you ain't. Neither are you. And that was the start of something. Not love. Not yet. That would come later, like spring in a place too dry to expect flowers, but a shift, a tilt in the ground beneath them. Inside the cabin, the women slept. The baby whimpered once, then quieted. Outside, 2 ghosts sat on a porch, sharing scars in the language of breath and starlight. And for the first time in 12 years, Ethan didn't feel like a ghost at all. The morning broke slow and silent, as if the land itself had paused to listen. A hush settled over the plains, the kind that made even birds forget to sing. Tobias Redmont stood at the edge of the porch, coffee in hand, steam curling like ghost trails into the cold air. His eyes weren't on the sunrise, they were fixed on the 12 warriors gathered near the barn, sharpening blades, tending bruises, and whispering in their native tongue, the rhythm of their words, rising and falling like wind through canyon walls. Mina had risen first, her body wrapped in an old flannel blanket Tobias had given her the night before. Her braids were undone now, loose dark waves catching the amber light, her bare shoulders marked by both scars and stories. There was a stillness to her this morning, not weakness, but that quiet alertness you see in wolves before the kill. Tobias watched as she paused to wash her face in the tin basin, water darkening the earth beneath her feet, her fingers trembling for the briefest moment. Inside the cabin, the fire had burned low. The air held the scent of cornmeal, dried leather, and something heavier, the lingering fear of being found. Tobias could feel it, not just theirs. His own too, rising again after years of silence. He thought he had buried it alongside his wife and child, but fear has a long memory. The knock came just as the wind shifted. A single rap, then silence, then another, not from the front, from the back of the house. Tobias moved slowly, setting the mug down. His boots creaked against the floorboards. Mina stood behind him before he even reached the rifle. "It's him," she whispered. Just 2 words, and yet they twisted something inside him like a knife. He didn't ask who. He could see it in her face. She'd been waiting for this knock her whole life. He opened the back door without ceremony. The man standing there was tall, face shaded by a battered cavalry hat, mustache silver, boots worn, jacket once blue, and still carrying the shape of command. But his eyes, those eyes were black oil, slick and depthless. "Redmont," he drawled, "you got something that belongs to me." Tobias felt Mina move closer, could hear the faint shift of steel behind him. The women had followed. "You lost 12 women, Tobias said, voice steady. "1," the man corrected. The rest are mine to command. But one of them made the mistake of loving me. Mina stepped past Tobias. Her spine was straight, her feet bare. She walked like someone who had walked through fire and didn't care who burned next. "You don't get to say that word," she said. Her voice had dropped low, so low it didn't echo. It hit like a bullet. The man's eyes flicked to her. "Mina," he said, as if tasting the name. "Colonel Reddick," she replied. "You should have stayed dead." It happened fast. A twitch, a shadow, a flash of metal. But Tobias was faster. The rifle fired once, not to kill, to warn. The shot struck the porch post inches from Reddick's head, splinters raining down like sharp snow. He didn't flinch. "You're a damn fool, Redmond," he said. "You think you can protect her? You think you can protect them all?" Tobias didn't answer. He didn't need to. Behind him, 12 women stood like a wall of flame. Leather skirts, feathered braids, faces painted with the ash of old grief. They didn't shout. They didn't scream. They just stood. A storm waiting for the wind. Reddick stepped back. He knew what it meant. "This ain't over," he said, and vanished into the mist. That night, they moved. Tobias packed supplies in silence. The barn was emptied. Water skins filled. Rifles wrapped in cloth. No one asked questions. Mina stood by the back door, watching the mountains. "He won't stop," she said. "I know." They followed him because he made them believe they had no other choice. Tobias looked at her. "But you knew better." Her eyes turned to him. "No," she said. "I just finally had enough." They left before dawn. The land stretched wide beneath them, a bruised sky overhead. Coyotes howled far to the east. The sound of distant drums rolled like thunder on the wind. 3 days they rode. North, through dry creek beds and over bone-dry ridges, where wind carved prayers into stone and silence meant survival. Each night, they lit no fire. Each morning, they buried their tracks with care. On the 4th day, Mina collapsed. The fever hit without warning. Tobias caught her before she fell. She was burning, her skin slick and pale, breath ragged. They stopped at the edge of a ravine, in the shelter of bent mesquite trees. He laid her on his coat, cradling her head in his lap. The other women circled around, forming a silent ring. He'd never seen her so still. "She carried a bullet in her side for 2 days, one of the younger girls said. "Didn't want to slow us down." Tobias felt his chest crack. He worked through the night, cleaning the wound, stitching her back together with hands that had once sutured his daughter's doll when she'd cried too hard to sleep. His fingers were rough, but they remembered how to be kind. When morning came, she opened her eyes. He was still holding her hand. She got better slowly. Fever faded like a bad dream. She didn't speak much, but when she did, her voice had changed. Softer, like the storm in her had moved out to sea. "Why did you help me?" she asked one night, staring at the stars. "You knocked on my door." "That's not an answer." He smiled. "No, but it's all I got." She reached out then, brushed a calloused finger down his jaw. "You're not who I expected. Neither are you." They reached the canyon on the 7th day. High walls of red stone opened like cathedral doors. The women moved silently, reverently, stepping between petroglyphs older than memory. Tobias had only heard whispers of this place where the old tribes came to hide, to pray, to disappear. They made camp deep inside, near a spring that tasted of copper and thyme. Tobias sat apart that evening, whittling a piece of cedar, trying not to watch Mina laugh with the others, her eyes alive in a way he hadn't seen before. But he saw the shadows too. Reddick would come. He always came. And Tobias knew, when that time came, there would be no warning shot, only fire, and maybe something worth burning for. The dawn came without promise. No birdsong, no golden spill across the valley, only a dull gray light that smeared itself across the mountains and settled over the ranch like a wet blanket. The kind of light that made a man feel like maybe the world was thinking twice about another day. Tobias stood by the fence line, boots sinking slightly into the damp earth, a steaming tin mug clenched in his scarred hand. He hadn't slept, neither had the horses or the women tucked inside the barn and bunkhouse, rotating watches through the night. Naira had taken the final shift, silent and vigilant, perched like a hawk on the loft beams, her eyes never leaving the tree line. There was something about that girl. Not just the fire in her arms when she drew the bowstring, or the tension in her jaw when she heard a twig snap in the dark. It was the silence she carried, like someone who had spoken all the words she ever wanted to say, and found none of them made the world any kinder. She approached him now, wrapped in one of his old oilskin coats, her hair damp from the mist. He noticed the way she walked, not like someone sneaking, not like someone afraid, but like someone who had earned the right to take up space. "We counted 3 men," she said quietly, not bothering with preamble. "They stayed on the ridge until a few hours before sunrise, watching." Tobias didn't ask how she knew. She just knew. "Were they armed?" he asked. "They carried rifles," she said. "And patience." That last word struck him harder than the first two. Patience meant they weren't desperate. It meant they were sure of something. Their advantage, their prey, their belief that Tobias Redmont wouldn't stick his neck out for anyone. He sipped the bitter coffee. "If they're watching, they're waiting for us to panic." "We don't panic," she replied. Her voice was steady, but her fingers betrayed her twitching against the edge of the coat, the calloused pads rubbing anxiously together. Tobias gave a low nod. "Then we hold the line." She looked at him then, not as a fugitive, not as someone who owed him gratitude, but as a woman who had stood toe-to-toe with death more than once and wanted to know, would he really stand with her when the sky turned black? Inside the bunkhouse, the other women were stirring. Tobias watched as one of the younger ones, barely more than 16, lit a small fire and passed around strips of dried venison. They chewed in silence, their eyes ringed with fatigue, but not despair. Not anymore. Maybe that's what scared him most, the spark returning to their faces. The way they began to believe, just a little, in shelter, in safety, in him. He turned away from the fence. "I'll need help reinforcing the north fence and digging 2 more foxholes," he said. "If we fight on our terms." "I'll take 3 women," Naira offered. "Soma knows terrain. Leah can shoot." "You trust them?" "I trust them to bleed," she said, "and not waste time with fear." Something about that made his chest clench. He nodded, then hesitated. "When this is over, what happens to you?" She raised a brow. "You planning on surviving?" "I don't make plans," Tobias replied, "but I want to know if I do." Naira stared at him, wind biting the air between them. "Then I suppose we'll see who we are without the storm chasing us." No. By nightfall, the ranch had shifted. The women moved like gears in a well-oiled machine, pulling canvas, cutting trenches, counting bullets with the precision of people who had run out of chances. But amidst the war readiness, Tobias noticed the little things. Soma laughed once, a short, surprised burst when he tripped over an old feed bucket and swore in a string of cowboy curses that would have made a saloon girl blush. Leah offered to mend the ripped sleeve of his duster. Another woman had made hot corn porridge without being asked and placed it near his seat by the hearth. Kindness, unspoken, undemanded. It unnerved him. That night, Naira found him on the porch, sharpening his knife in long, measured strokes. "You ever think about leaving this place?" she asked. "No," he said without looking up. "Not even once?" He paused. "It's not that I haven't thought about it. It's just, out there's full of ghosts, too. I'd rather stay with the ones I buried myself." She sat beside him, legs pulled up, arms resting on her knees. The moonlight played over her face, catching the soft bruises beneath her eyes. Fatigue, grief, maybe both. "You lost them here?" she asked gently. He nodded. "My wife was born with laughter in her bones," he said slowly. "You ever meet someone like that? Just sunlight walking. And my little girl, she had my stubbornness and her mama's eyes. Smart as a whip. Used to braid my mustache while I napped on Sundays." He chuckled, and it broke something in the air. "They died in a raid?" He nodded again. "Not Apache. White men looking for land. Thought I was harboring savages because I let an old Lakota woman sleep in the barn one winter. That was enough." Naira's voice was barely a whisper. "I'm sorry." Tobias shook his head. "Sorry don't change the dead. But it does remind the living they ain't alone." They sat in silence, the knife forgotten, the ghosts momentarily quiet. Then she spoke. "My mother died giving birth to me. My father trained me like a soldier by the time I was 10. Not because he was cruel, because he knew the world was. He was right. They hung him for stealing cattle. Only he never stole a damn thing, just refused to sell his land to the same men you're talking about. Their eyes met. For the first time, not as strangers bound by storm and survival, but as two broken things that had stopped bleeding long enough to wonder if mending was possible. "Do you think," she asked softly, "that two people built from ashes could ever build something else?" Tobias stared at her. Her face was unflinching in the moonlight, but there was something trembling beneath, not weakness, not fear, but hope so raw it hurt to look at. "I think," he started, then faltered. "I think if the fire don't kill you, it teaches you how to hold warmth again." Her lips parted, not in a smile, but something gentler, grateful, curious. He leaned back against the post, the cool wood pressing into his spine. "We got maybe a day before they come," he said, changing the subject like a man trying not to drown in his own heart. "Maybe two if they're stupid. Then we use every breath like it matters," she replied, "even the quiet ones." And in the quiet that followed, Tobias realized he hadn't thought about dying all day. 2. If you're still reading, partner, drop a blank in the comments if this story's starting to burn a little hole in your chest. We're just getting to the blood and glory. Part 5 is coming soon. The sky over Arizona cracked open with a low, growling thunder. The desert wind had turned colder than it should have been for a late summer night, sweeping the dunes with the hush of something waiting to pounce. Tobias stood beside the dying fire, boots half buried in sand, fingers curling around the hilt of his Niffonot out of fear, but out of something older, deeper, a memory etched in blood. Aylin was asleep against the base of the canyon wall, her back barely brushing the stone, hair dark as storm water spilling over her shoulder, her breaths quiet, but not peaceful. She'd been dreaming again, he could tell by the way her fingers twitched, how her brows furrowed as if she were still fighting in her sleep. 12 women, 12 warriors who once believed they would die nameless in the sand. They were still out there hiding, scattered, breathing shallow beneath cactus shade and broken trees. Tobias had carried them through hell more times than he could count, but tonight something had shifted. Aylin had let him hold her hand. Only for a heartbeat, only in the dark, but it was real. He moved slowly toward her, crouched beside the sleeping figure. Her cheek had the faint trace of dirt, but her skin still held the memory of firelight, and when she breathed in, it was with the delicate edge of someone who'd learned how to survive too long. She stirred as he reached for the blanket sliding off her shoulder. "You always look at me like you're waiting for me to disappear," she whispered without opening her eyes. Tobias froze. Then his voice, low, roughened by the wind. "I'm waiting for you to realize you deserve to leave, not vanish. Lair." Aylin opened her eyes now, blinking against the dark, and met his gaze. "I already left once. It didn't save anyone. You saved me." Silence pressed between them like the space between two gunshots. Aylin sat up slowly, her back straight despite the exhaustion curled into her spine, her hand brushing her ankle where the scar still ran jagged like a red river through her skin. "I didn't save you," she said, her voice sharp now. "You lost everything. You think I don't remember? I didn't lose you." That stopped her. The air shifted. The stars dimmed behind clouds, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote gave a single, solitary howl. Tobias didn't move. He didn't have to. Aylin's eyes shimmered not with tears, but with the kind of weight only women who've outlived men twice their strength carry. "You have no idea what I've done," she said, softer now, and it wasn't a confession, but a warning. He nodded. "Then show me." Aylin stood. Her figure, lit only by the ghost light of the fire's last ember, looked carved from every part of the desert dust, thorn, heat, and sorrow. She moved toward the ridge where their horses were tied, and Tobias followed, boots crunching the silence beneath him. When she reached the edge of the canyon, she stopped. Wind tugged at her shawl, and her eyes scanned the shadows far below. "They'll come through the northern pass at dawn," she said. "The scouts from El Aguila. If we're not gone by then, they'll smell blood," Tobias finished for her. She turned to face him. "I'll buy you time." "No," he said, stepping forward. "That was never the deal. You don't get to choose the deal anymore," Aylin snapped, voice edged with something dangerous. You broke it the day you came back for me. I came back because you were the only one I ever believed in. That did it." The words shattered something inside her. She exhaled once, violently, as if a rib cracked beneath the weight of memory. "I'm not someone to believe in," she said, voice trembling now. "I lied. I ran. I left 12 sisters for dead, and 10 of them are still alive because of you." Aylan looked at him, then truly looked at him, and for the first time in a long while, Tobias felt her break open. Not with weakness, but with raw truth. Her eyes widened slightly, mouth parted, and she whispered like a woman remembering how to breathe. "I buried my name that night." He reached for her hand. "Then let me give it back to you." She didn't pull away. Behind them, the fire had long gone out. Only shadows remained. But under the cover of darkness, with the desert watching like a silent god, 2 broken souls held each other for the first time, not as survivors, but as something more dangerous, as people who dared to feel again. The snow. By morning, the wind carried something else with it, dust from the north, and the stink of horses. Aylan had left before sunrise. Tobias had known she would, but she left her dagger beside his bedroll. It was her way of saying, "Trust me one last time." He mounted his horse, strapping the dagger to his side, and rode northwest, where the pass narrowed into a throat of red rock. When he reached the peak, he spotted them 6 riders, cloaked in black, bearing the sigil of El Aguila. He recognized the leader, Captain Vega, scar running down his left cheek, mouth always twisted like he was chewing secrets. He rode with the arrogance of a man who'd never lost, and when he saw Tobias waiting at the pass, he slowed. "Well," Vega called out, voice echoing like a sneer through the canyon. "Didn't expect to see a dead man guarding the door." "I'm only dead if you think bullets are prayers," Tobias replied, hand resting casually on his rifle. Vega smirked. "Still talking like a poet, and you're still bleeding like a coward." Vega dismounted. "Where's the girl?" Tobias didn't answer. He didn't have to. Because behind Vega, from the eastern ridge, came a shriek. One of the scouts fell forward, an arrow buried in his neck. Then another cry, and a woman's silhouette leapt from the cliffs above, dark braids flying like a hawk in descent. Aylan. She landed behind the second rider, slit his throat before his horse even bucked. Chows erupted. Gunfire. Screams. Horses rearing. Tobias didn't hesitate. He raised his rifle and fired once, clean through the chest of a third scout. Then he was moving, boots pounding dirt, charging toward Vega. Aylan fought like a storm. Every move was precise, brutal, elegant in the way only those who've known silence and survival can be. Tobias saw her duck beneath a blade, drive her elbow into a man's throat, and twist his arm until it snapped. Then she saw Tobias, and for 1 second, everything slowed. Blood on her cheek, dust in her hair, and her Aisher wild, unbroken eyes met his with something like firelight inside. Together, they ran. Through the smoke, through the gunshots, through the dying howls of men who'd never understood mercy. The desert swallowed them again, and when the last of Vega's men fell, only Tobias and Aylan remained standing, breathing, bleeding, alive. Gand. That night, back in the hollow between 2 cliffs, Tobias tended to her wound. She'd taken a cut across her ribs, nothing deep, but angry. He cleaned it with water from his flask, and Aylan hissed through her teeth. "You're too gentle," she muttered, biting the inside of her cheek. He smiled. "I learned from the best." Aylan looked away. "You're a fool for staying, and you're a fool for thinking I wouldn't." The moon rose, pale and full like a silver coin lost in the sky. Aylan leaned back, shoulder brushing his. "I was ready to die today," she said. "I wasn't." She turned to him, eyes glinting. "Why?" "Because dying is easy," Tobias said, his voice low. "But building something worth staying alive for, that takes guts." Aylan said nothing for a long time. Then, "You think we can still build something?" He nodded. "Not with bricks, but with names, with stories, with the truth." Aylan let out a breath. And then, for the first time in years, she let her head rest against his chest. The first rays of dawn spilled gently over the ridge, washing the earth in a hue of amber and silver. Aylan sat still beside the dying embers, cupping a tin of warm water in her hands, though she wasn't drinking it. Her eyes drifted to the horizon but didn't seem to focus. The truth was, she hadn't slept all night, not because of the dangers that lurked in the wilderness, but because of the man lying behind her under layers of blankets. Tobias was alive, and somehow, that fact was harder to face than the fear of losing him. When he collapsed against her with blood soaking through his shirt, she had braced herself for the worst, not just for his death, but for what that death would awaken in her. For someone like Aylin, raised between two worlds that never welcomed her, attachment had always meant vulnerability. Yet now, with Tobias's soft breathing behind her, she realized something terrifying. She had let him in. "You're up early," came his hoarse whisper. She turned, surprised to find him awake. He was propped up slightly, his face pale, eyes soft with exhaustion but still focused, still alive, still watching her like she mattered. "You should be resting," she replied, her voice quieter than she intended. "Are you mad at me for getting shot?" he asked with a faint smile. She moved closer, kneeling beside him. "If I were mad, you'd try to act tough. If I said nothing, you'd think I didn't care." His eyes searched hers. "So, do you?" Aylin didn't look away. Not this time. Not after all they'd endured, the hiding, the riding, the long silences, the moments when he'd stood between her and danger without hesitation. "Yes," she said simply. "I care." The air between them shifted. He reached for her hand, slow, deliberate, and this time she didn't pull away. Their fingers met, not like a soldier's grip or a comrade's clasp, but like something tentative, fragile, and real. "I thought I was just helping a stranger," Tobias said. "A woman on the run. But the more we traveled, the more I listened to you, the less I wanted to walk away." Aylin's hand trembled in his. "I've been running all my life," she murmured. "From white men, from my own people, from the way everyone tries to define me before they know my name. They wanted to trade me, tame me, own me. I thought if I kept moving I could outrun what they saw. But then," she paused, unable to finish. Tobias squeezed her hand gently. But then you came," she whispered. "And you didn't ask for anything. You didn't push. You just stayed." "Man." He sat up slowly, grimacing with the weight of his injury, but never letting go of her hand. "I'll keep staying," he said. "If that's what you want, I'll stay, even when this is over. Even when we find somewhere no one knows your name or mine." Aylin blinked hard, as if trying to keep emotion from spilling over. She wasn't used to softness. She wasn't used to being chosen not as a prize or a burden, but as a person. "I don't want to run anymore," she said. "But I don't want to be trapped either. I want land that doesn't belong to anyone. I want a place where we plant our own fire pit, where no man comes to claim me, where no name is tied to a past I didn't choose." "Then that's where we'll go," Tobias said, smiling through pain. "We'll make that place. You build the shelter, I'll hunt the meat. You cook, I'll wash the dishes." She laughed, a real sound, like sunlight catching on cold water. "You think I'm the kind of woman who does dishes?" "No," he said, eyes gleaming. "But I'd do dishes every night if it meant seeing you laugh like that every morning." She looked at him then, not as an outsider, not as a white man, not as someone who owed her or who she owed. Just a man. A tired, battered, stubborn man who had risked his life to protect hers. "I don't know what tomorrow brings," Aylin said. "But if you're still beside me when the sun rises again, then I'll know I've chosen right." He reached up, brushing a loose strand of hair from her face. His touch was careful, reverent, as if she might disappear if he wasn't gentle enough. "Then I'll be here," he said, voice low. "And every morning after, if you'll have me."